again, if you were watching my first tutorial, my Splashy Arty Story number 001, I showed you how to do a simple flat wash. So I've devised a little exercise for you now, which is going to get you practicing flat washes, which is what I call a dribbly bottom wash. So what I want you to do is go to the cupboard, preferably the cereal cupboard, and raid a few cereal boxes. And as you can see, what I've done, I've cut out just the lettering of a few cereal boxes there. And they're about 1 inch square, 2.5, 3 centimetre square. And what you do is you play around with them and you try and find something that you like. You're trying to make a nice pattern, an abstract pattern with a few colours. Doesn't have to be that many colours. So let's say I go with that. So I don't need those now. If you then take a piece of watercolour paper, and as you can see what I've done, I've marked out the watercolour paper into 6 squares, and I've just enlarged that pattern into 6 squares. So that's going to give you lots of lovely shapes to paint, and I've made this exercise a little bit harder than the first tutorial. Right, so let's get going then. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this bit here, and if you remember from the first tutorial, you mix up your paint, so it's about semi-skimmed milk. And again, I'm just using a small brush. I would use a slightly larger one, but again, because you probably just started watercolour painting, I don't want to frighten you too much. So there we are, a nice loaded brush. And if you remember, we always work a flat wash at a slope. So there we are, that's a slope of about 45 degrees. So I'm loading my brush and I'm just going to sweep it along the top of that shape there. Now it's quite dry at the bottom, so what I want to do is I'm going to add more paint. And if you remember from my first tutorial, that's called a bead. And then I can just let gravity paint this for me. This is going to be a little bit more complicated than the shape that we did in the first tutorial, because I've got to start working round things. Right, so I'm going to pull that down. That's got a good bead on it, so I can leave it for a bit. If you let that dry, then you're going to run into problems. So again, I can just keep this going. And it's quite relaxed, quite therapeutic really once you get going. Again, that's getting a little bit dry, so I'll just load it up again. And then I know I can leave that then because it's not going to dry out. So I can just tease that down using the tip of my brush and that one there. And then I can just keep going. And as you can see, it's going down perfectly flat. I'll just take that down. As soon as you feel the beads drying up, just add to it. You can do this really slowly. There's no real rush for it. I just take it down there. So this is fairly straightforward because it's just a blue and it's leaving me a white shape. Anything which is a bit of a bobbly edge, but again, don't worry if it's a bit wobbly there, because we're going to disguise that right at the end. Now look, that's getting a bit dry, so I'll add a bit of that and I can go back to this one. And the reason I'm doing both the washes at the same time is because if I did just that bit and I left it there, when I went back to try and finish it off, it would dry a rather unpleasant line. So what I've got to do with a shape which combines like that, which joins up, I've got to paint it at the same time. I'm going to show you a slightly tricky one in a minute. So again, look, the bead's drying up a little bit, so let's add to it. And I haven't forgotten that one. Just keep adding to it, right. And if you remember from my first tutorial, don't ever go back into that wash. Even if you're very tempted to, don't ever go back into it because it'll ruin it. Right, and again, if you can remember what we did at the bottom, we just went into the water, wiped it off on a rag, that squeezed the water out of the brush, and that now is what we call a thirsty brush, and it'll just pick up that there, that one, and it'll just pick up this. Now because this is all wet, what I can't then do is paint next to it. If you can look at this shape, I'll bring this shape up. That's got yellow. Well, I'm going to do this. This is what you don't do, but you'll see why. If I painted this yellow up to it and it's not quite dry, it'll start to, oops, especially if I overpaint it like that, it'll start to run in. Let's maybe use dry. All right. Well, let's try it down there. Perhaps show it better. Now you'll see what's happening there. Can you see it's all that's starting to bleed into that, which is what I don't want. So view, and you can see here it's all happening. So what you're best to do is to paint this and then paint something up there and paint something up there. Right, so let's paint this complicated shape here. We've got this here now. Because it's quite a complicated one, you don't necessarily have to paint it with the board held this way. We could put the board that way. And what we can then do is it just makes an easier start. So we can again get a bead going along the top, use the point of your brush like that, and just take it down all the way down. This is going to really test your brush skills, because you've got to get round some shapes there. Any white you just leave, because that's the white of the paper. Get a little bit dry there, so let's take that down. And again, if you've got, take that one there. See, it's a bit like, I always think it's a bit like when you're spinning plates. Not that I've done much plate spinning, but it's that type of thing. So I can keep that one going there, and then I can start on this one here. I am aware that that one then needs to be, again, it's getting a bit dry, so let's add to it. I just whizzed down the bottom. I think you get the idea, hopefully. Let me just, before that, let's get rid of that. Right, okay, keep this going. I'm almost at the bottom now. Right. I say try and keep a smooth edge, but don't worry too much if it goes over, because we're going to disguise the edges with a black felt pen in a minute. Right. Keep that one going. And again, that's gone down perfectly flat. And you'll know this time not to paint anything near it, because you don't want this to happen. See, that one's quite ruined. When you've done that and you've filled in all your shapes, just to neaten it up a little bit, get a black felt pen and a ruler, and you can just have fun with the shapes. Now, I've just taken a line round there, so we could just do that, and it starts to make quite interesting shapes, especially if you've arranged it so you've got the same colours. Just round like that. Again, don't worry if you make a mess like that. Any straight edges, just don't know if I've got any more straight edges. Yeah, any straight edges, use a ruler.